I'm standing at the head of our family's mahogany dining table, watching 24 faces stare at me in complete silence. My hands are shaking as I hold this manila envelope that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. The crystal chandelier above me is casting these weird shadows across everyone's shocked expressions, and I can hear my grandfather's clock ticking in the corner like a countdown timer. Before we eat, I say, and my voice sounds stronger than I feel, you all need to see something. My sister Natalie has gone completely white. She's frozen with her champagne glass halfway to her mouth, like someone just told her the world was ending. My dad's hand is already moving toward his jacket pocket where he keeps his phone, probably thinking about damage control. I pull out the first document. This is a forensic accounting report of the Whitmore Trust. The trust that was supposed to give both me and Natalie $40 million each when Dad retired. You could hear a pin drop in this room right now. Natalie got her $80 million last month, plus the Malibu mansion and that Tesla she's been driving around. I let the bank statements flutter down onto the table like confetti at the world's worst party. But here's the thing, I was supposed to get the same amount. Every single penny. I watch my sister's face drain of all color. Alex, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I'm pulling out the second document now, the one that stranger handed me outside my crappy apartment 3 weeks ago. This shows exactly how you stole my inheritance and how long you've been planning it. My dad starts to get up, but I hold my hand out like I'm stopping traffic. Sit down, Leonard. We're just getting started. But first let me tell you how I got here. 6 months ago, I was still playing the role of the good daughter, working myself to death in Dad's investment firm, pulling 70-hour weeks, living in a studio apartment that cost half my salary because I was building character. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just until Dad retired and split the family trust. I was 32 years old and still trying to earn my father's approval. Natalie, though, she'd been the golden child since birth. While I was grinding through business school and junior analyst positions, she was backpacking through Europe and starting art galleries that failed within 6 months. Somehow, our parents thought her creative struggles were more meaningful than my financial success. Alex works so hard, Mom would tell her dinner party friends, but Natalie really feels things. It made me want to scream. I felt things too, like stress, exhaustion, and the constant pressure to prove I belonged in this family. But apparently working 80-hour weeks to build Dad's company wasn't as emotionally complex as painting muddy abstracts in a converted garage. Dad treated us completely differently too. When I'd present quarterly reports, he'd grunt and point out every tiny flaw. When Natalie showed him her latest painting, and they all looked like something a toddler would do with finger paints, he'd study it for minutes, nodding like he was looking at the Mona Lisa. Very emotionally complex, sweetheart. You're really developing your artistic voice. Last Christmas, she mentioned wanting to expand her studio space. By New Year's, Dad had written her a $50,000 check. When I asked for help with a down payment on my first real apartment, he lectured me about financial responsibility and suggested I keep renting to build character. I should have seen the signs then. The way Dad's face would light up when Natalie called, versus the tired resignation when I walked into his office. The way Mom bragged about Natalie's brave artistic journey, while describing my career as steady and dependable, words that sounded like insults coming from her mouth. But I was too busy trying to be perfect to notice I was already failing. The trust conversation happened on a Tuesday in March. One of those gray Seattle days where you forget what sunlight looks like and everyone moves around like zombies. Dad called me into his office. The same office where I'd received every lecture about disappointment, every reminder that I wasn't quite measuring up. "Sit down, Alexandra," he said, using his board meeting voice, all formal and distant. "I want to discuss the future." I straightened my blazer and sat in that uncomfortable chair across from his massive mahogany desk. The same chair where I'd been told I wasn't working hard enough, wasn't strategic enough, wasn't living up to the Hampton name. "I'm retiring next year," he said, opening this leather folder placed perfectly in the center of his desk. 65 feels right. Time to pass the torch. My heart started racing. This was it. The conversation I'd been waiting for since I was 18. The trust distribution. Exactly. The Whitmore Trust will be distributed according to the original terms. He smiled, but something felt off about it. Too practiced, like he'd rehearsed this speech. 40 million each for you and Natalie. The Malibu house will go to whichever of you wants to handle the maintenance responsibilities. $40 million. I'd been calculating that number in my head for 7 years. Enough to start my own firm, travel, maybe actually live instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck despite my 6-figure salary. There's just one administrative detail, Dad continued. The distribution needs to be handled carefully for tax purposes. Natalie's portion will be processed first, given her unique circumstances. What kind of unique circumstances? Her art career. The IRS treats creative income differently, and we want to avoid any complications. Sounded reasonable. Dad was always 3 steps ahead on financial strategy. That's how he'd built this company from nothing into an empire. He said staggering the distributions was smart. Then it was smart. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to see the paperwork. I should have gotten my own lawyer. Instead, I thanked him and went back to my office, already planning what I'd do with my freedom. Looking back, that conversation should have sent me running straight to the nearest attorney. But when you've spent your entire adult life trying to earn someone's love, you don't question their decisions. You just trust them and hope this time will be different. The next few months felt like a dream. Dad seemed warmer toward me, including me in strategic planning meetings, even joking that I'd finally earned my stripes. Natalie was unusually sweet too, calling me every week, actually listening when I talked about work instead of just waiting for her turn to speak. In June, she invited me to lunch at this ridiculously expensive bistro downtown, the kind of place where a salad costs $30 and they serve water in wine glasses that cost more than my car payment. She looked amazing that day, blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. I have incredible news, she said before our appetizers even arrived. Dad's moving forward with my trust distribution. It's happening next month. I nearly choked on my wine. Next month. That seems really fast. You know Dad, once he decides something, he wants it done immediately. She leaned across the table like she was sharing a secret. Between you and me, I think he's worried about potential changes in tax law. Better to move the money now while the regulations are favorable. Made perfect sense. Dad was always anticipating market changes, always positioning himself ahead of the curve. Your turn comes right after mine, she continued, her eyes bright with excitement. Dad just wants to stagger them to avoid triggering any IRS audits. Smart, right? I raised my wine glass. To the Whitmore Trust finally paying off. She clinked her glass against mine, and I swear something flickered in her eyes, something that looked like pity. But I pushed the thought away. Natalie was finally treating me like family, and Dad was finally recognizing my worth. Everything was falling into place exactly like I'd always dreamed. I was such an idiot. August 15th was Natalie's distribution day. I'd been counting down like a kid waiting for Christmas, marking it on my calendar, setting phone reminders. The plan was simple. Her 40 million would transfer first, then mine would follow within 60 days. I was in my office when she called, practically breathless with excitement. Alex! The money came through this morning. How does it feel to be $40 million richer? There was this pause, just a beat too long before she answered. Amazing. Incredible. I keep refreshing my bank account to make sure it's really real. And the house situation. Dad's handling all the paperwork. He thinks it makes more sense for me to take ownership since I have more flexible time to manage property maintenance. More flexible time was just a nice way of saying unemployed. But I pushed down the irritation. In 2 months, I'd have my own financial freedom, and then we'd see who had flexible time. What about that Tesla he mentioned? Oh, that. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Dad surprised me with it yesterday. Said it was an early birthday present. After we hung up, I sat staring out my office window at the Seattle skyline, watching seagulls fight over garbage in the alley below. $40 million. A mansion in Malibu. Brand new Tesla. My sister had just won the lottery, and soon I'd join her in the winner's circle. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy for her. For the first time in my life, I felt like we were actually going to be equals. I should have known better. In my family, happiness was always the calm before the storm. September crawled by like torture. Every morning I checked my email for updates from Dad's lawyers. Every afternoon I refreshed my bank account even though I knew nothing would be there. Every evening I made lists of what I'd do with $40 million. Start my own investment firm. Buy a house with actual square footage instead of living in a closet with a kitchen. Travel to all those places I'd bookmarked on Instagram but never visited because I couldn't afford the plane tickets. Maybe even ask out that woman from the coffee shop without calculating whether I could afford to take her somewhere nice. Dad seemed unusually busy during this time, traveling more than normal, taking mysterious phone calls behind his closed office door. When I asked about my distribution timeline, he'd wave me off with vague reassurances about legal complications and paperwork delays. These things take time, Alexandra. The lawyers want to make sure everything's bulletproof. We can't afford any mistakes with this much money. Meanwhile, Natalie had transformed overnight. Gone were the thrift store clothes and beat-up Honda Civic. She showed up to Sunday dinners in designer outfits, driving her sleek black Tesla, casually mentioning renovation plans for the Malibu house like she was discussing the weather. "I'm thinking about converting the East Wing into a proper art studio," she said over brunch in late September. "Maybe add a gallery space for showcasing local artists. Really give back to the creative community." Mom practically glowed. "How wonderful, darling. You're going to change so many lives with your generosity." I stabbed my eggs Benedict harder than necessary. "Sounds expensive. Money isn't really a concern anymore." She smiled with this serene expression, cutting her smoked salmon with surgical precision. "It's amazing how differently you think about everything when you're financially secure." I wanted to point out that I'd been financially secure my entire adult life, just on a different scale. But I bit my tongue and counted the days until October. October 1st came and went without a word. Then October 15th. By November I was calling Dad's office every single day. "Ms. Hampton is in meetings all day," his assistant kept saying, her voice getting colder with each call. "I'll make sure he gets your message." But the messages were never returned. When I cornered Dad in the office hallway, he'd pat my shoulder and promise to get to the bottom of this delay. When I suggested we call the lawyers together, he'd suddenly remember an urgent conference call that couldn't wait. The excuses were getting more elaborate by the week. The IRS flagged Natalie's distribution for routine review, so they're holding all related transfers. There's a complication with the trust documentation that requires amended paperwork. The bank is being overly cautious about large transfers in the current regulatory environment. Each explanation sounded believable by itself. Together, they formed a pattern that made my stomach twist with dread. I started doing my own research, staying late in the office to access financial databases I normally wouldn't need. The Whitmore Trust was real. Established in 1987, designed to provide for Dad's children's future. But the deeper I dug, the more questions I had. Why had the trust's value suddenly jumped to $80 million in 2023, when steady growth should have topped out around $60 million? Where had that extra $20 million come from? And why were there so many recent amendments to the original documentation? The final piece of the puzzle came when I accessed the trust's quarterly statements through a contact at our accounting firm. I had to promise him dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city, but it was worth it. The October report showed a current balance of $0. Not $40 million waiting for my distribution. Not even $20 million. Nothing. The trust was completely empty. I printed the statement and stared at it under the harsh fluorescent lights of my empty office. $0. Natalie hadn't received $40 million from the trust. She'd received everything. I called Natalie at 11 p.m. that night, too furious to care about proper phone etiquette. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep and probably wine. "Alex, what's wrong? It's really late. How much did you actually get from the trust?" Complete silence. I could hear a TV playing softly in the background, some late-night movie with violins and dramatic dialogue. Normal sounds from a normal evening while my entire world was collapsing. "What do you mean?" "I told you. I mean, I've seen the statements, Natalie. The real ones. The trust is empty. Completely empty." More silence. The kind of silence that tells you everything you need to know. "Alex, you're scaring me. Can we please talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down?" "No, we can't talk about it tomorrow. We're talking about it right now. How much did Dad actually give you?" When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Smaller but somehow harder. Like she'd dropped a mask I didn't even know she was wearing. "You don't understand the full situation. Then explain it to me. Use small words so I can keep up." Dad was worried about the company. About the economy. He thought it was better to consolidate the trust money with someone who wouldn't take unnecessary risks with it. I actually laughed. This harsh, bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. Someone who wouldn't take risks. "Natalie, you've never held a job for longer than 6 months. You've started 3 businesses that all failed spectacularly. I'm the one with the MBA and 10 years of financial experience." That's exactly why he was worried. Her voice was gaining strength now, conviction. "You would have invested it aggressively, tried to grow it, maybe lost it all in some startup venture. This way, the money stays safe." "Safe with you? You mean stolen by you?" "It's not stolen if Dad approved the transfer." The casual way she said it, like my entire future was just a minor accounting adjustment, hit me harder than screaming would have. I hung up and sat in my kitchen until dawn, staring at the evidence of my own stupidity. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spread every financial document I could find across my tiny kitchen table, trying to piece together exactly how they'd orchestrated this theft. What I found was worse than simple greed. It was a masterpiece of betrayal. The trust modification documents were dated 6 months before Dad's retirement announcement. Right around the time I'd first mentioned wanting to start my own firm someday. They'd been planning this before they even told me about the distribution. The original trust language was clear. Equal distribution between Leonard Hampton's children upon his retirement or death. But the amended version included language about distributions at the trustee's discretion based on each beneficiary's demonstrated financial responsibility and long-term stability. Financial responsibility. Long-term stability. Completely subjective terms that gave Dad total control over who got what. But the document that really broke me was a psychological evaluation report dated 3 months ago. A licensed therapist had supposedly conducted an assessment of my mental state and found concerning risk-taking behaviors and potential for financial irresponsibility. The report cited my excessive ambition, my workaholic tendencies, and my stated desire to start an independent business venture as evidence that I couldn't be trusted with a large inheritance. Every conversation I'd had with Dad about my future, every dream I'd shared about eventually going out on my own, had been twisted into evidence of my unfitness to inherit my own trust fund. The therapist's signature was illegible, but the letterhead was clear. Hampton Family Psychological Services. A quick internet search revealed it was a one-person operation run by Dr. Elizabeth Crane, whose LinkedIn profile showed exactly one professional connection: my father. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They'd created fake psychological evidence to justify it. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and started making a list of everyone who'd helped them. It was going to be a very long list. By morning I had a plan. Not revenge yet. I wasn't ready for that level of thinking. But I needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done, and I needed professional help to navigate it. Davidson, Pierce & Associates occupied the 40th floor of the Columbia Center. All glass walls and uncomfortable modern furniture that cost more than my car. I'd chosen them specifically because they specialized in trust disputes and had zero connection to Dad's business network. Margaret Davidson was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that probably scared opposing counsel in depositions. She listened to my entire story without interruption, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. "How long ago did you first discuss this trust with your father?" she asked when I finished. 7 years ago, when I graduated business school. He presented it as settled fact, equal distribution between Natalie and me when he retired. "And you never saw the original trust documents yourself?" "I was 18 when it was established. Dad handled everything." I pushed the papers I'd gathered across her desk. "These are copies of what I could access through my company's legal database." She spent 20 minutes reviewing everything, her expression getting darker with each page. Finally, she looked up with the kind of expression lawyers get when they smell blood in the water. "Ms. Hampton, I need to be completely honest with you. What your father and sister have done is legally complex, but it's not necessarily illegal under Washington state law. Trust modification is allowed if proper procedures are followed." My heart sank. "So they can just steal my inheritance and walk away?" "The question is whether proper procedures were actually followed. This psychological evaluation, for instance. Did you ever undergo any formal psychological assessment?" "Never. I've never even heard of this Dr. Crane person." She made another note. "We'll need to investigate that thoroughly. And trust modification requires specific legal notifications to all beneficiaries. Did you receive any formal notice of proposed changes to the trust?" I thought back over the past year. Nothing formal. Just general conversations about distribution timelines. "That's our first angle of attack." She leaned forward like a predator spotting prey. "Ms. Hampton, I'll be completely honest. Trust litigation is expensive and time-consuming. Even if we prove procedural violations, your father has significant resources to fight us. Are you prepared for a long, expensive battle?" I thought about my cramped apartment, my 70-hour work weeks, my sister driving around in a Tesla that should have been half mine. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes." Margaret's team moved faster than I'd expected. Within a week, they'd uncovered the first major crack in Dad and Natalie's scheme. Dr. Elizabeth Crane didn't exist. The business license for Hampton Family Psychological Services had been filed using a fake social security number. The address was a mailboxes, etc., in Tacoma. The phone number connected to a disconnected voicemail. The website was completely fabricated, built with stock photos and fake testimonials. Someone invested considerable time and money creating a convincing paper trail, Margaret explained during our second meeting. But they made critical mistakes. The psychological evaluation methodology referenced in this report doesn't actually exist. The testing instruments they cite were discontinued in 2019. Whoever wrote this had access to psychological terminology but zero actual training. I stared at the fake report that had sealed my fate. Who would have the resources to create something this elaborate? "That's exactly what we're going to find out." She handed me a thick folder. "This is a forensic accounting proposal. We need to trace every dollar that went into and came out of that trust. We need to understand the complete timeline of when decisions were made and who was involved." The cost estimate made my stomach clench. $40,000 upfront, with potential additional costs if the investigation expanded. More money than I had in savings, more than I could afford on my current salary. But it was also the only path to the truth. "There's something else you need to understand," Margaret said as I signed the retainer agreement. "Trust litigation creates public records. Once we file initial motions, your family will know you're fighting back. Are you prepared for that confrontation?" I thought about Natalie's casual dismissal of my concerns, Dad's elaborate lies, the months of fake reassurances while they systematically destroyed my future. Let them know. I'm done hiding from the truth. The forensic accounting team worked like detectives, carefully examining every financial transaction to reveal the conspiracy underneath. What they found was so much worse than simple theft. It was a systematic, years-long plan to eliminate me from the family fortune entirely. The Whitmore Trust had originally been funded with exactly $40 million, split equally between two sub-accounts designated for Natalie and me. But starting in 2022, Dad had begun a series of administrative transfers that gradually moved my entire share into Natalie's account. The transfers were disguised as investment rebalancing, portfolio optimization, and risk management strategies. Each individual move was small enough to avoid triggering automated audit flags, but together they represented the complete liquidation of my inheritance. "Look at this timeline," Margaret said, spreading financial statements across her conference table like evidence at a crime scene. "The transfers accelerated dramatically right after your conversation about wanting to start your own firm." She was absolutely right. Every time I'd mentioned my entrepreneurial ambitions to Dad, another chunk of my trust fund had mysteriously moved to Natalie's side of the ledger. They hadn't just been stealing from me. They'd been monitoring my conversations and timing their theft accordingly. But the most devastating discovery was still coming. The trust hadn't originally been worth $80 million. The extra $40 million had come from somewhere else entirely. My grandfather's estate. My grandfather had died when I was 12, and I'd always been told his assets were used to pay off business debts. The truth was that he'd left a substantial inheritance specifically designated for his grandchildren, money that Dad had been managing as trustee for over a decade. Natalie hadn't just received my share of the Whitmore Trust. She'd received my grandfather's inheritance too. Everything that should have been mine had been systematically transferred to my sister while I worked myself to death, believing I was earning my place in the family legacy. They'd stolen my past, my present, and my future. 3 weeks into the investigation, our breakthrough came from the most unexpected source: Natalie's own financial records. Margaret's team had subpoenaed bank statements and credit card records as part of discovery, and buried in the paperwork was evidence of just how deep this conspiracy ran. The records showed regular monthly payments to Dr. Elizabeth Crane's fake practice, not for psychological services, but for consulting fees. The payments had started 8 months before the fake evaluation was conducted, proving that Dad had been planning this deception for almost a year. But the most damning evidence came from text message records between Natalie and an unknown number. The messages, obtained through a court order, revealed the cold calculation behind their theft. "Dad's getting worried that Alex is asking too many questions about the timeline. Just keep her focused on work stuff. The less attention she pays to trust administration, the better for everyone. What if she starts demanding documentation? She won't. She trusts Dad way too much. She always has." The final message, sent just 2 days before the fake psychological evaluation was completed, was the smoking gun we needed. "Crane report is finished. Alex comes across as unstable and financially reckless. No court in the world would approve her inheritance now." I read those messages 3 times before the full impact hit me. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd spent months studying my behavior, manipulating my emotions, crafting the perfect psychological trap. Every family dinner, every casual conversation, every moment of warmth from Natalie had been a performance designed to keep me compliant while they systematically destroyed my future. Margaret looked up from her legal pad with the expression of a lawyer who'd just found a case-winning piece of evidence. "Ms. Hampton, we have them completely. This is fraud, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty, and probably several other charges. The question now is what kind of justice you want to pursue." I stared at the evidence spread across the table. Bank statements, forged documents, manipulative text messages that proved my own sister had been playing me for a fool. Justice wasn't enough anymore. I wanted complete and total revenge. Over the next month, Margaret's team constructed what she called an absolutely airtight case for complete trust reversal. The legal strategy was elegant: prove Dad violated his fiduciary duty as trustee, demonstrate the psychological evaluation was complete fraud, and show I'd been systematically excluded from decisions affecting my inheritance. But I was thinking much bigger than legal victory. I was thinking about the annual Hampton family Thanksgiving dinner, the same gathering where Dad made his traditional toast about family values and the Hampton legacy. The same dinner where Natalie would undoubtedly show off her new wealth while I sat there pretending to be grateful for my studio apartment and 70-hour work weeks. This year was going to be very different. I want to serve them at dinner, I told Margaret during our strategy session. She looked up sharply from her notes. Serve them what exactly? Everything. The lawsuit, the subpoenas, the criminal referrals. All of it. I want them to receive the papers in front of the entire family. That's highly unusual. Most people prefer private service to avoid family drama. I laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. Margaret, they spent over a year lying to my face while stealing everything I was supposed to inherit. They created fake psychological evaluations and bribed fake consultants and turned my own words against me. Family drama is exactly what they deserve. She made careful notes, but I could see the concern in her expression. Public service will escalate this conflict significantly. Your father has substantial resources and connections. He'll fight back extremely hard. Let him fight. I have something he doesn't have anymore. What's that? The truth. And a very detailed plan for how to use it. Margaret set down her pen and looked at me directly. Ms. Hampton, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. What's your end game here? Is this about recovering your inheritance? Or is this about revenge? I thought about her question for a long moment. About the months of lies, the fake concern, the systematic betrayal by the two people I'd trusted most in the world. About Natalie's casual dismissal of my pain and Dad's elaborate deceptions. Both, I said finally. I want every penny of my money back, and I want them to face real consequences for what they've done. Not just legal consequences, social consequences. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of people they really are. Thanksgiving dinner at the Hampton family estate was always an elaborate production. Extended family, business associates, longtime friends. Usually about 30 people gathered around the massive dining room table while Dad held court like some benevolent patriarch dispensing wisdom and charm. This year, I was going to give them all a show they'd never forget. Margaret had prepared a comprehensive legal package. Civil lawsuit seeking full trust reversal, criminal referral for fraud and conspiracy, emergency injunctions freezing all assets transferred from the trust pending litigation. The documents were thorough, devastating, and designed for maximum legal impact. But I'd prepared something else entirely for the family audience. Working late nights in my apartment, I'd created a presentation detailing every aspect of their betrayal. Bank statements showing the systematic transfer of my inheritance. Screenshots of Natalie's incriminating text messages. Financial analysis proving the trust had contained exactly what they'd stolen from me. Most importantly, I documented the fake Dr. Elizabeth Crane, complete with evidence that the psychological evaluation used to justify my exclusion was completely fabricated. The presentation was designed to be understood by normal people, family members who wouldn't grasp legal complexities but would immediately understand the moral outrage of what had been done to me. I'd arranged for the legal documents to be served at exactly 8 p.m., right after Dad's traditional toast but before dessert. Margaret had initially resisted the theatrical timing, but I'd convinced her it was strategically sound. Maximum witnesses, minimum opportunity for Dad and Natalie to control the narrative. The day before Thanksgiving, I called Natalie to confirm I'd be attending dinner. She sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me, asking if I needed a ride, offering to pick up anything I might want to contribute to the meal. Her kindness made me physically sick. Even now, with everything I knew about her betrayal, she was still performing the role of the loving sister. I'll definitely be there, I told her. And I'm bringing something really special to share with everyone. The Hampton estate looked like something from a magazine spread about elegant holiday entertaining. Crystal stemware caught light from the massive chandelier, reflecting tiny rainbows across the cream-colored tablecloth. The dining room buzzed with comfortable chatter from people who'd never worried about money, never questioned whether they belonged, never stayed awake calculating the cost of basic necessities. I arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather portfolio that contained enough evidence to destroy 2 lives. Dad greeted me at the door with his traditional bear hug, his booming voice carrying across the foyer. "There's my hard-working daughter. How's the office treating you these days?" Natalie appeared moments later, absolutely stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. She kissed my cheek and linked her arm through mine like we were the closest siblings in the world. "Alex, I'm so glad you made it. Wait until you see the dessert I brought. It's from this incredible bakery in Paris." Paris. Of course she'd been to Paris. With my money. Dinner conversation flowed through all the usual topics. Business updates, travel stories, charitable donations. Uncle Robert told elaborate stories about his recent Alaskan cruise. Cousin Jennifer announced her engagement to a surgeon from Portland. Aunt Patricia showed off photos of her new granddaughter. Normal family stuff. Warm and genuine and completely oblivious to the massive fraud that had funded half the people at this table. Natalie dominated much of the conversation, describing her renovation plans for the Malibu house with the breathless enthusiasm of someone spending other people's money. She'd hired an architect from Los Angeles who specialized in sustainable luxury design. The East Wing would become her art studio, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private entrance for potential buyers. "It sounds absolutely wonderful, darling," Mom said, reaching across the table to squeeze Natalie's hand. "Your father and I are so proud of how responsibly you're using your inheritance." My inheritance. But I smiled and nodded and complimented the wine selection. At exactly 7:58 p.m., Dad stood up for his traditional toast, and I felt my heart start racing. Dad cleared his throat and raised his wine glass, commanding attention like he had at every family gathering for as long as I could remember. The dining room fell completely silent except for soft classical music playing from hidden speakers throughout the house. 23 years ago, he began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to being heard and respected, Margaret and I started this Thanksgiving tradition. We wanted our children to understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about shared values, loyalty, and taking care of each other through good times and bad. He looked directly at me. His eyes warm with what seemed like genuine paternal affection, made my stomach turn. This year, I'm especially grateful for both my children. Natalie has shown such remarkable wisdom in managing her inheritance, already making plans to support other artists and give back to the creative community. Polite applause rippled around the table. Natalie beamed like she'd actually earned any of it. "And Alex," Dad continues to prove herself every single day at the firm. Her dedication, her integrity, her careful approach to financial decisions. These are the qualities that make me proud to call her my daughter and my business partner. The irony was absolutely staggering. He was praising my integrity while robbing me blind, celebrating my financial wisdom while using it as justification to steal everything I'd worked for. I stood up slowly, my portfolio in hand, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. "Thank you, Dad. That really means a lot coming from you." The room waited expectantly. This was usually when I'd make some self-deprecating joke about being the boring, responsible one and sit back down, playing my assigned role as the humble, hard-working daughter. Instead, I opened my portfolio. "Before we continue with dinner, I have something I'd like to share with everyone. It's about family values, actually. About loyalty and taking care of each other." Dad's smile faltered slightly. Natalie's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. 6 months ago, Dad promised me that I would receive my share of the family trust, $40 million that was supposed to secure my future, just like Natalie received hers. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. I could feel tension radiating from Dad's end of the table like heat from a fire. But here's what actually happened to that money. I pulled out the first document and everything changed forever. This is a forensic accounting analysis of the Whitmore Trust, conducted by a licensed CPA firm with no connection to our family. I held up the thick report so everyone could see it clearly. It shows that over the past 2 years, Dad systematically transferred my entire inheritance, all $40 million, directly into Natalie's account. Gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the room like a stone thrown into still water. Uncle Robert leaned forward. His face creased with confusion and growing anger. "Alex, what exactly are you talking about?" "I'm talking about systematic fraud." I pulled out the bank statements next. These show the complete paper trail. Small transfers disguised as investment rebalancing, moved strategically whenever I mentioned my plans to eventually start my own business. Dad found his voice, but it sounded strangled. "Alexandra, you don't understand the financial complexities involved." "I understand them perfectly." I cut him off, pulling out the psychological evaluation. "This is a mental health assessment supposedly conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Crane, documenting my financial irresponsibility, and recommending that I be excluded from the trust distribution entirely." I looked directly at Natalie, who had gone completely pale. "The only problem is that Dr. Elizabeth Crane doesn't exist. The entire psychological practice was fabricated specifically to justify stealing my inheritance." The dining room erupted in shocked voices. Jennifer's surgeon fiancé was taking notes on his phone. Aunt Patricia was staring at Dad with open horror, like she was seeing him for the first time. "But here's my absolute favorite part," I continued, pulling out the printed text messages. "These are communications between Natalie and her co-conspirator, discussing how to keep me distracted while they finalized their theft." I read directly from the messages, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned silence. "Keep her focused on work. The less she pays attention to trust administration, the better." I looked up at the shocked faces around the table. "And my personal favorite. She trusts Dad too much. Always has." Natalie stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor like nails on a chalkboard. "Alex, stop this right now. You're embarrassing yourself and destroying this family." "I'm embarrassing myself." I laughed, a sound that came out much harder than I'd intended. "Natalie, you've been living off stolen money for 4 months. You bought a Tesla with funds that legally belong to me. You're renovating a mansion with my inheritance while I take the bus to work because I can't afford car payments. That's enough." Dad's voice boomed across the room with real authority. "This is a family dinner, not a courtroom." "You're absolutely right," I said, reaching into my portfolio one final time. "This isn't a courtroom. But you'll both be seeing plenty of those very soon." At exactly 8 p.m., Margaret's process server appeared in the dining room doorway like an avenging angel. Margaret's process server was a small, efficient woman in her 40s who moved through the dining room like she'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. She carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of neutral expression that suggested she'd witnessed every possible form of family drama. "Leonard Hampton?" she asked, consulting her official paperwork. Dad's face had gone from red to ashen in about 3 seconds. "Yes. You're being served with a civil lawsuit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and conversion of trust assets. Please accept these documents." She handed him a thick manila envelope with his name typed on the front in official legal formatting. The dining room was absolutely dead silent except for that classical music, which now seemed inappropriately cheerful given what was happening. "Natalie Hampton." The process server turned toward my sister with professional precision. Natalie looked like she might actually faint. Her face had gone completely white. Yes. You're being served with a civil lawsuit as co-conspirator in trust fraud, and with a criminal referral for conspiracy and money laundering. Please accept these documents." A second thick envelope changed hands. Natalie stared at it like it might explode and destroy what was left of her world. Additionally, the process server continued with calm efficiency. "Both defendants should be aware that emergency injunctions have been filed freezing all assets transferred from the Whitmore Trust pending litigation. This includes bank accounts, real estate, and vehicles purchased with trust funds." She handed Dad a third envelope. "This contains the complete asset freeze order, effective immediately. Have a pleasant evening." And then she was gone, leaving chaos in her wake. Uncle Robert found his voice first. "Leonard, what the hell is going on here?" Dad was staring at the legal documents like they were written in a foreign language. His hands were actually trembling as he held the papers that would destroy his reputation forever. Natalie had sunk back into her chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Alex," she said quietly, desperately, "we can work this out. Family doesn't sue family. We can fix this." I looked around the table at the faces of my extended family. Shock, confusion, anger, disgust. These people had known me since I was a child. They'd watched me work myself into exhaustion trying to prove I belonged here. They'd celebrated my achievements and supported my dreams. Now they were seeing exactly how that loyalty had been repaid. "You're absolutely right, Natalie," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "Family doesn't sue family. Family also doesn't steal $40 million from family and create fake psychological evaluations to justify it. But apparently we each have very different definitions of family loyalty." The silence that followed was deafening. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office. Actually my office this time, not Dad's company, reviewing the final settlement documents that had just arrived by courier. The legal battle had been swift and completely decisive. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud and the threat of criminal prosecution, Dad's lawyers had recommended immediate settlement. I'd recovered my full inheritance plus interest, legal fees, and punitive damages. Natalie had been forced to return every stolen penny, including the Tesla and the Malibu house. Dad had resigned from his company in disgrace and was facing a lengthy investigation by the state attorney general's office. But sitting there in my downtown Seattle office, surrounded by expensive furniture and the view I'd always dreamed of, I felt absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no peace, no sense that justice had actually been served. The Hampton family Thanksgiving tradition had ended forever that night in November. Mom filed for divorce the following week, citing irreconcilable differences, but privately telling me she couldn't forgive Leonard for destroying everything she'd believed about their family. Most of the extended family had chosen my side once they understood the full scope of the fraud. Natalie had moved to Portland, where she was reportedly working as a waitress while her legal team filed hopeless appeals. Dad was living alone in a studio apartment in Tacoma. His reputation and fortune completely destroyed by his own greed and stupidity. I'd won everything. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd exposed their betrayal and forced them to face the consequences of their actions in the most public, humiliating way possible. So why did I feel so completely empty inside? Justice, I'd learned, was the coldest comfort imaginable. The money couldn't buy back the years I'd spent believing my family actually loved me. The legal victory couldn't erase the knowledge that the two people I'd trusted most in the world had systematically planned my destruction for their own benefit. I'd gotten everything I'd wanted and lost everything I'd thought I had. The stranger who'd handed me that envelope outside my apartment had given me the power to destroy my entire family. I'd used that power completely, efficiently, and without any mercy whatsoever. Some victories, I was learning, are completely indistinguishable from defeats. But at least now I knew exactly what my family was worth. Nothing at all. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and revenge.